All right, Ken, it's all yours.
All right. Is Liz going to be joining us? I didn't remember seeing.
I didn't hear otherwise.
I didn't hear otherwise? Okay. So we'll go ahead and start. So I want to call to order the Board of Education Budget, Finance, and Operations Committee meeting. And we'll just jump right in. Welcome. I was gonna welcome Liz to newly to the committee, but we'll do that later. So, Dawn, you want to start with our financial report?
Certainly. Before you is the financial report year-to-date through December 31st. As of December 31st, we have expended or obligated $94,625,000 of our $99.9 million appropriation, which is approximately 95%. At this time, it does not include any of the offset for special education reimbursement. And I'll get into special education reimbursement in a little bit further in my report. As of this time, salaries and certified and non are expected to be within budget. Medical benefits are expected to be within budget. Other benefits such as post-retirement benefits, pension, long-term, short-term disability are all within tracking on budget. Fica and Medicare, at this time, we have 13 pay periods that have been processed. Remember, Fica and Medicare are not pre-encumbered, so they happen actually as payrolls are processed. They are expected to be within budget. Special education, that budget relies heavily on the excess cost reimbursement. We do have it budgeted at a negative $1.4 million, which means we need to receive $1.4 million from the state in order to make the special education budget whole. First filing was in December. The filing in December was $1.5 million less than the filing in December last year. This is due to two factors. One, we have lower transportation expenses that we could add to the students' total expense in order to submit them for reimbursement. And they also raised the ceiling. So what that means is normally we have to spend a certain amount of money on a student before we can submit them to the state for a partial reimbursement. Last year was $87,000 we'd have to spend on a student. Anything over that, then we can take that entire amount and submit it to the state. Now it's 92 or approximately 92,000. So we have to spend the first 92 before we can even apply that student to the state for reimbursement. We don't know at this time how much reimbursement we will get. Last year, we received 73.65% of all of our submission in reimbursement. So my only concern is that the $1.4 million might be a little difficult to reach this year. However, we are spending less. So where we're spending less in the budget, if we don't receive that, hopefully they come together and it's somewhat of a wash. Transportation, we are still paying them on a monthly process as opposed to paying them in the two larger deposits payments that we used to do, mainly because of the situation that we're in. Energy, we've locked in electricity through June 2021, as I mentioned before. With the delivery rate increase, we weren't anticipating that increase when we had set this budget. So that is something that is costing us more, as well as running the electricity in the schools, our filtration systems 24/7, 360 the whole time. It is causing us more of a demand expense than we had originally anticipated. So we are looking that electricity 19. I'll get into the unbudgeted COVID-19 expenses with my report, but basically if you look at the projection report that we have out there, that'll give you an idea. The very last line on the projection report is the COVID-19 account that we maintain all of the activity. And at this point in time, the ledger shows that we had 815,877 in spent funds. We have encumbrances of 68,747 for a total of 884,625. And of this amount, we have currently transferred 189,888 to offset Chromebooks purchased during this year in order to do distance learning and have a student one-to-one with their books. That gives us a balance of 694,736 on this ledger line that still needs to be covered going forward. When we get to my report, you'll see that that's a little bit more because we have salaries that are not on this ledger line, that their salaries are tracked in the salary accounts as opposed to this ledger line. And you'll see how that all comes together. Hopefully I've done a better job at bringing that all together on my COVID report. Food service is an area that I wanted to bring attention to. As we're halfway through our fiscal year at this time, it is being evident that less food is being purchased in the cafeterias. We have less students in the schools, and therefore, because the food service is a self-funded program, we're not bringing in the revenue in order to cover the expenses that normally occur, salaries, the benefits, the cost of purchasing food, the cost of running the program itself. And we will be running short in that area. I did have, if you look at the school lunch line on the projection report, we normally budget about $22,000 that the general fund has to cover, and mainly that's because the high school is not on the National School Lunch Program. So any expense in the high school is 100% covered by the general fund. Normally we have revenues that come in from the high school that way outweigh that, so we don't usually, $22,000 is a safe budget number to have to cover. At this point, we have spent $69,593. So we have overspent that budget already. And in anticipation, looking out through the rest of the fiscal year, if it maintains the way it is, we're looking at approximately $500,000 over budget on food service. That could change as we go through. We're beefing up some of the mitigation areas that we're working on. Is right now, the federal government is allowing every student to have one free meal a day. And for every free meal that is taken, whether it's in school or out of school, at our East Ridge Middle School, we have evening pickup for meals between 3 and 4 o'clock COVID, okay. The beginning part of my report should look very similar. It shows you by department or cost center the expense that we have incurred so far. Facilities is $453,000 in a COVID unbudgeted COVID expenses. Nurses 26.7, special education 13,000, technology is the lead in 526,000, and curriculum about 92,000. So we have spent on these lines $1,112,000. This expense that you're looking at on these lines is pretty much accounts payable. So anything that would run through our accounts payable, purchasing of tangible goods or services that dealt with specifically a need to cover COVID costs that we did not budget for. Moving further down to the next group, actual payroll related as of January 12th, 21. Health paraeducators cost us $9,915 in salary. Building substitutes, $217,250. Custodial overtime at that as of January 12th was $17,346, and the COVID liaison was $8,947. So in addition to the accounts payable, we have $253,459 in salary COVID expenses. If you flip to the second page, you'll see it kind of broken out by each category: supplies, PPE, partitions, HAVEC system, storage containers, outdoor tents, curriculum, technology. All those are areas that we have discussed in my previous memos. In addition to that, you'll see the salary expense of $253. And then in addition to that, you'll see the food service, which is the new category that is now shown over budget, $47,000. And the main reason that this is also with COVID is because of the COVID situation, with students not being in the schools, to purchase meals and not purchasing meals in the schools itself. At this time, we have grant draws of $293,000. We have transferred the $189,888, and we have other funding of $125,640. That other funding, if you remember, is that insurance reimbursement that we received due to the COVID process that occurred at the last quarter of last fiscal year. At this time, we have $1,413,000 in expenses, an offset of $608,625. So we still have amount to be covered, $804,475.
Dawn, just to be clear, that would be if the year ended now.
And that would be if the year ended today, right?
Right.
Or I should say as of January 12th.
And this $804,475 does not take into account the 2% lapsing fund that we'll receive from the town, right?
Correct. We have not asked to draw that in. Correct. This is only the grants that we currently have been approved for and have been awarded, the transfers that we have occurred, and the insurance funds that we received for COVID.
Anyone have any questions? Rachel?
I was taking a look at that fact sheet that we got. I wasn't sure if we got it from Cabe. The ESSER2 fund, would we apply and receive any money from that? It was dated December 27th, 2020. Is that the leftover amount?
So there's a second line of funding that's anticipated that school districts will receive some amount. We will apply when it arrives, but we don't actually know what the allocation is. My guess is it'll probably be connected to Title I, and that's how our amounts will be received. From what I understand, there is the categories of how we can spend that money will be broader to include our ability to provide intervention services, let's say in the summer for children. I don't know if that will be our priority. It will all depend. But from what I understand, it'll include that category, and we will have until the end of September of next school year, or fiscal year 2022 to use it.
Oh, great. Thank you.
Any more questions?
Any other questions? I had one, Dawn. How does your overall update? How does this 804,000 tie into the COVID account, the 694?
The COVID accounts is specifically just accounts payable,
right?
And anything that processes through there, and then the offsets are accounted in that. Any transfers that we can transfer in. What that line does not include is any salaries. So the difference between those two is basically salaries.
Okay.
But do know that some of our COVID reimbursements is due to salaries, and those salary transfers have not occurred yet, but they will.
Okay.
So eventually it'll all come together.
Got it.
It's timing at this point.
Sure. All right. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, and then I don't think, did you hit page 3?
Page 3.
The unanticipated expenses?
Oh, nope, I did not. Let me hit page 3. At the end of page 2 is pretty much the 2 grants that we have that, and I gave you the amount received, submitted for reimbursement, and the categories that we had been approved to spend money on. Page 3, you'll see that has changed, where I used to have the salaries as part of the anticipated. I've moved that to only show actual, not the full anticipation. Food service, now I have that as anticipated, and we'll bring that number down as I bring any overage to the other portion of the report. We still have a possibility of some more PPE that we're going to have expenses for, protective supplies, training materials, and unknown technology that could come. So that number is down to 605,700, and mainly it's the food service area right there that's causing that number to be so high.
Okay.
So hopefully this memo, now in accordance with the memo, I have spreadsheets on every one of the numbers, every category, every department. I didn't think it was appropriate. I figured it'd be easier to do it in a summary, which is why I sent it in a memo.
No. It often is.
Yeah.
Any more questions about COVID? All right. I believe we're moving on to building rentals.
Okay, let me move. Since Liz isn't here, I'll just I was going to give a broader overview of where the committee has gone and why we chose 3 accounts to review that we did. But since she's not here, I will move forward because the rest of the committee has been involved in a lot of the decisions that we've done already so far going forward. A quick update on school building rental. At our November meeting, we went over with the assistance of the facility manager, Joe Moritz, our facility use process. We discussed and revised the process and procedures and shared the revision documents with the committee at that time. These documents will all be available on our district website. We have used our management decision in order to contract with Facility Dude. It's a software program that we're going to be using in order to track, register, maintain the school building rental. It also has a component where we can have customers set up and maintain billing and receipts. And so we have the whole package going with the use of this Facility Dude software. And I believe that we did not, as a committee, come up with what the appropriate reserve in the checking account would be. something that I think we still need to discuss eventually once we get to that point. Past practice was $100,000 to $150,000 to cover emergency repairs that were needed and not budgeted for that would prevent an event from happening. More than half of our rental customers, I just want to remind everyone, is not-for-profit. And even though we don't charge not-for-profits to any fee for use of our facilities, but we still do have expenses. We still do have to pay the custodian overtime. And on a normal year, custodian overtime runs between $80,000 and $90,000. So keeping in mind the fact that over half of our renters don't pay anything to rent the buildings, we still have expenses. When we start to think about what is the right amount of money to have as a reserve to cover situations. The other part of the reserve that our thought process was in the past, or people in the past thought process was for $100,000, $150,000 is the timing of the event, the expense, and then the receipt of funds from the customer. There's always a lag, especially at year end for something like that. At this time, like I had said, we had signed the contract with Facility Dude. Our timing on setting up that process is to start in January. We'll be starting that implementation of that software and getting all of our updated website reports on the website, as well as the information, rules, regulations, the fee schedule, workflow process, and then working with the training for all the individual schools and principals as to how the new process works. The other thing that I believe the committee had decided on was that any athletic rental will go through school building rental and the new Facility Dude process, but that the workflow and the approval process will still go through the athletic director and the principals, so that there is no cross communication or renting of something that is not fully transparent with the individuals who are responsible.
Yep, that makes sense.
Did I miss anything in school building rental?
Anyone have any questions? I had a quick one, Don. So have we? How are we determining the fee schedule? Has that been recently reviewed?
I brought the fee schedule at the November meeting. Okay. I'll bring that back up again. Okay. We basically did two things when we reviewed the fee schedule. One, we kept a similar fee schedule to what we had, but we also looked at best practices and what other districts do. And where we had a fee for every individual piece of something, they did more of a, most locations did more of a general fee, and then additionals, like if it's extra lighting or if it's extra expense, overhead expense to us, there'd be an additional fee for that. So we melded those two together and came up with a fee schedule that we felt was appropriate.
Okay, and we included a piece for the Facility Dude.
That's correct. We did. We did include a fee for the Facility Dude, so we'll offset the cost of that software. However, we do also maintain a small amount in the budget process in order to pay that fee ahead of time, sure, so that which also would be, okay, how much do we keep in the reserve? Do we have to cover that contract January or July 1st? Do we cover that contract a little bit later? And then do we offset that with budget, or do we offset that later on? Right. That kind of a timing issue. Right.
And because there will be some expense with that, because again, we're not charging over half of the users. We're not Correct. Charging the rental fee. So.
Yes. A not-for-profit is not charged any expense to use the buildings or facilities.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any more questions? All right, Dawn.
Okay, student activity. We really haven't brought student activity before this committee to have an in-depth discussion. I believe when we first brought the 3 bank accounts forward that we're going to be reviewing, I did bring before the committee the student activity manual that I was working on. Still working on that, haven't completed that yet. Hope to have that done after budget season. That is just a better guide for all the individual schools to help them with their processing of their student activity accounts and making sure that they stay within compliance. One area that has changed, and the reason why it's before the committee today, is that we have closed the savings account that was in the Ridgefield High School Student Activity Fund and move that money into the checking account. So it can now be used for whatever it is that is determined by the principal to be best used for the students of Ridgefield High School. We have both Dr. Greenwood and Mr. Street here in order to give some color to some of that. They have a couple of ideas on how to use that fund. It was approximately $279,000 in that savings account that we moved to the checking account. Let's see. My recommendation would be to keep the process transparent, and whatever recommendation that they bring forward, we also move that as a item of information onto the full board so that everyone is aware of how we're spending down that money.
Dawn, can I just clarify a couple of things? Maybe this would be helpful for the public. Is that the bank account, that is the savings account, being closed or just transferred into the checking, the balance?
Completely closed.
Okay, so that is account number, it probably doesn't matter that much, but I think it was 1967 maybe?
I believe so.
It was the old,
The oldest account, right? The oldest account out there.
Okay, and then the second question, or maybe just point that I wanted to bring up, is that the auditors are in agreement that we can transfer from our savings into our checking so long as it follows the student activity rules, right?
Correct, absolutely. They said it's actually best practice to get rid of that savings account, to have the one student activity account in order to maintain it. And now that we have a software financial system, that we maintain the activity and the process through our financial software system, as opposed to how it was handled many years ago, which created that issue.
All right, and then the last question is, you're recommending that we bring up the way in which the monies are being spent to the full board, primarily because this particular student activity account had so much attention drawn to it, right? Rather than, this wouldn't be a practice. This is just
normally we would never bring any student activity usage before the board, because we do have policy on how to spend that money. It is student money. It is not general fund money. And we are, by state statute, allowed to move forward with the way that we currently have the process set up under that state statute.
Thanks, Dawn.
Sure.
I had a quick question. If it's best practices, has the accounting firm recommended us do this in prior years?
I don't know. They hadn't recommended we close that savings account in prior years.
Do we have an idea if it's best practices? Do we have an idea why this wasn't something that they had discussed with us?
I don't think that it was ever an issue, as long as those funds were maintained. There wasn't any change in them. They didn't feel that it's our, as management's overview as to how those funds are spent. But given the fact that there is that savings account out there, they don't think that having two accounts is the right way to do it. That they believe that having everything in the checking account so it all flows through our normal accounting process is the right way to do it.
As a general rule, during the audit, so separate from this, a bigger picture, does the accounting firm come up with the way you're doing it is fine? It's generally accepted accounting principles. We're going to sign off on it. However, here are some suggestions for best practices moving forward. Is that?
Not necessarily. If there's an issue with our practice as to how we maintain the accounting for the activity of the fund and or the reconciliation of the banks And if there is a concern, then they would bring forward a recommendation.
Okay.
But the savings account was money that was never touched, it was never used, it was never drawn down. So to them, it was just funds that were sitting there until somebody decided to use it. And then all of our normal activity that did flow through the student activity checking account was in compliance with the requirements that they would audit and see. And therefore, there was no questions on that practice as well.
Sure. Oh, I understood. But my question was more from a general, like all of our practices, not just around the student activity fund. Do they come in and say, okay, more or less, yes, you're doing everything great. However, there are some things that you could do better, or
we do have discussions on areas of improvement.
Okay.
They do also offer a management letter at the end of the audit, which they have done, which will be once I receive all the books and the audit and the details on that, I'll bring before this committee to bring before the full board as well.
Okay.
But that's more high level
Sure.
controls and whatnot.
Yes, of course.
If there's a lack in controls or a lack in a process, that hits the management letter. Other than that, they do have discussions with us. This is probably a better way to do it.
I just wanted to make sure.
Yep.
Ken, if you don't mind, I just wanted to ask another question. So Dawn, I know in your draft guidelines that you're still working on until the end of budget season. It feels like it'll never end. But nonetheless, I know that within that document, you speak about the surplus funds so that we're not in the same position in future years and making that transition into the schools, just to be sure that we're not accumulating large balances from year to year, right? And there'll be some processes or structures into that.
Yep.
And then I don't know if we're ready to jump back in, Ken, but I would like Dawn to speak a little bit about how student activity funds can be used and how they can't be used. So I don't know if we're ready or.
Oh, I think we're absolutely ready. I think that's important.
Student activity funds are funds that are received for the student by parents, by donation, specifically for the students. Funds that are received in the student activity fund must be used for the purpose that they're taken in for, one. And there are some funds that are taking in fees, class fees, and things like that, that are also in the student activity. And per our policy 3453, it gives the principal of each school as the controller for those funds, and they can determine how those funds, that it may be general funds for all students, can be used. But student activity funds must be used for the purpose, and it must be used for students.
And to clarify, that policy is based on state guidance?
It is based on, it is in conjunction with the state guidance, because what the state guidance says is that we're allowed to have these funds and that we must dictate a treasurer of the funds, and that particular person has to be paid for out of the normal appropriation. So obviously our policy chooses the principals as the controllers for those funds, and their salaries are paid for out of the general fund, the regular appropriation that we would normally receive from the town.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So Dawn, just to clarify, so this is a surplus of funds from years past. So these would, in your new draft guidelines, right, these would be transferred into the general activity account, which would then, and this has been approved by the auditors, would then be determined by the school principal, but could be used to benefit for the entire school community.
Correct. That is accurate. That is accurate.
Right. And that's important because the funds may have originally been for a specific subset of students.
Right. And at this time, we do not have an ability to determine specifically what each of those funds were collected for and were not used for. And therefore, it is in our best judgment to give it to the principal to use for all students in order to use those funds down.
And are the funds going to be used for the benefit of all students, or are we allowing for them to be used for just different subsets of students?
I'll let Dr. Greenwood speak to that. He has a couple of good ideas along with Mr. Street. They have some areas that they have a need for those funds that I think will benefit all students.
Okay.
And just one other key point is that the student activity account is intended not to supplant the general operating budget.
Correct.
And therefore, it must supplement what we do for kids. And so it shouldn't necessarily, everything has an unintentional connection to kids and curriculum, but theoretically, it should not supplant the work that we're doing within our general operating budget.
Right.
Okay, I promise that's it for me.
and before we jump into Mr. Street and Dr. Greenwood, I would like to recommend that you consider, when you present it to the full board, that you start with the explanation that you just gave of the student activity funds, what they're for, what the intention is, touch on your guidelines, and then get into what we did under the recommendation of our auditors.
Perfect. Will do.
Okay.
Ready for me?
Yes, sir.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for having me, and also Dane's here too. So a couple of projects that we've had our eye on that we think definitely are will enhance the experience for our students. So I'm going to attempt to share my screen here, and teachers are very good at this. Administrators not always so much. So let me see if I can figure this out. All right, so can you see the spreadsheet? A thumbs up from someone?
Yes.
It's tiny?
It's tiny.
Tiny font.
All right, hold on. Let me. Okay.
Oh, better. There you go.
Okay. All right, cool. Thank you. So the two projects that we're looking at, and one of the reasons I have Dane here too, because one of the projects definitely ties into Tiger Hollow, and I think the next piece that Dane's going to be talking about in some ways too. The purpose of one is talk about some video production. So currently we don't have video production class here, but it is an area where students have shown a lot of interest. And what we'd like to do is take what we're doing now. We're doing a lot of eye in the sky sort of video production, and we'd like to move it to actual producing content, student-driven content, to really bring back this notion of them, taking back their school and putting out there for the whole community all the good things that they're doing, but the students doing that themselves. And so what we'd like to do is a video production room for video editing and streaming of RHS events. So we need to do that. We really need a space, and so we need to build a soundproof and temperature-controlled space. And we've had some technicians in, both for the technical side and for the structural side, to look at this. And so they've given us their expertise in terms of what we really need to get this off the ground. And part of that, then also we need to purchase mobile cameras, lights, microphones, along with the video and editing equipment. And also we'll be looking at a student-run club, but it's going to be in the direction of our new Director of Educational Technology, Dr. DeSantis, who has some background in this area, and he's super excited to take on this project too. So we definitely have an adult who will be able to move it in the right direction too, for fear that we'd not have somebody pushing it in the right way. And the idea is that the students themselves will video and stream events at Tiger Hollow. We have a space at Tiger Hollow that we can use for this room. All the events that happen at Tiger Hollow, things like graduation, so we could be mobile. Doesn't matter where it is, we can have the kids there doing this work. Music concerts, plays, musical club events. It really will be up to how far we can get the kids to stretch their imaginations, what they can use it for. But it all starts with we need a physical space and we need the equipment. But I think it's a really natural progression for especially a school like ours, where we're doing so many extracurriculars, to, instead of paying companies and having eyes in the sky, to put into the kids, teach the kids how to do this work. And Wes, of course, has some expertise here, and he's really excited to take the project on. So that's the first project. I'll talk about both projects briefly, and then I'll show you some of the spreadsheets. And the second is the addition of spaces in the building we're calling Learning Connections rooms. And the idea is to have some flexible workspaces outside of the classroom to work on academic projects, small group conferences, meet with teachers, complete work, make up tests. Essentially, not a library where there's classes meeting often where it's quiet, and not a classroom, because teachers are often sharing classrooms, but spaces that are really student spaces in the departments where kids can go, they can relax, they can talk, but really they can work on individual projects, but spread throughout the building. One of the things we know with social emotional learning is they don't all want to be in the student center where it's very loud, and they don't all want to be in the library where it's very quiet. And so you find kids in every nook and cranny of every building. And so we want to provide some structured spaces that are really for the kids. It's flexible furniture, flexible seating, some technology in there. And then we're going to it'll be available before school, during, and after. We're going to staff it as part of teachers on duty staffing the room. And currently we have 5, one's in use as a classroom, but 4 left of these static computer labs. If you remember back in the early 2000s when they put the addition on, they built these static computer labs with these big fixed to the floor computer stations, which of course, these rooms have become completely obsolete. And there's one in each department. Computer labs, of course, are not used that way anymore. So what we can do is have our own guys have already started working on this. They've removed all of that fixed to the floor furniture, retiled, repaired, and fixed the spaces. And so there's 4 of these. They're basically double classrooms, and there's 4 of them throughout the building. There's one in math, history, world language, and English. And so the spaces are ready to go. It's now time to transition them into student spaces, which is to get the flexible furniture in there and get them up and running and get the teachers' duties. And then I also think that coming out of this year, the COVID years, we keep saying, and into next year, providing more opportunities for kids to be together, more opportunities for them to be back in the building, reasons to be together with their teachers doing work is really going to benefit our kids. So those are the 2 projects that I think fit pretty well into this idea of student activities and definitely would enhance the building and the educational experience for the kids. The dollar amount we'd be looking at to get these projects, I'm going to shrink it just a little bit to click over. The dollar amount we'd be looking at to get these 2 projects off the ground comes in right around $200,000. So, and I'll send that. Susie has this, and she can, I know, get this along to you. A large part of it, back to the Tiger Hollow, is getting the room actually set up. So getting the room set up, soundproofed, the HVAC set down there so that the equipment can stay down there permanently, comes in right around $90,000. Moving to the right, the technical equipment, working with Dr. DeSantis in terms of the audio visual microphone stands to actually start using the room, comes in right around $50,000. And then the Learning Connections furniture, so flexible furniture to outfit the 4 spaces, comes in at about $45,000. And then last, technology for those spaces so the kids can share ideas with each other, comes in right around just shy of $15,000. So that puts us in at a grand total of right around $205,000, which obviously leaves room for anything unforeseen that might pop up during these 2 projects. So that's where I was going to start. Obviously, can do a lot more work on this. Didn't want to get too far until I'd spoken to you. Now, anybody? Yeah, sure, Sean.
Yeah, Sean.
So, as somebody who's been slinging cameras at the recent orchestra concerts, I think it's a wonderful idea. I've been calling it for a while, and Wes is the right guy.
Agreed.
A little concerned over the cost of the Tiger Hollow stuff, given that we still have a track that we have to repair down there. And the only one line item that I am going to call out and present a problem with, since I'm an FAA safety team officer, is the purchase of 2 drones. You guys are directly in controlled airspace, and there's a lot of requirements that you guys have to undergo before that. And the fact is, anybody under 16 won't be able to even do that. Part 107, you have to be 16 or over. So I think you guys need to look at that part real carefully. I'm happy to sit with Wes and go over the rules and regs, but there's a lot to follow.
Okay, yeah, definitely, that'd be great. I'll make a note and follow up with Wes.
Okay. Are there any other questions? Oh, Rachel.
I just want to piggyback off of what Sean said. I think those were great suggestions, Sean. I also think, just looking forward to Saturday, the budget is very lean, in my opinion, and has a lot of deductions. So I think this is very innovative. I think it supports the vision of the graduate. I just have a question about maybe costs moving forward for next year. So if we
Yep.
implement this now, do you foresee any?
Yeah, that's a good question. So
Yep.
once we get it off the ground, get the space set and the equipment going, we're reasonably certain we're not going to have any issue using Perkins funds for maintenance and maintaining it as we move through. The Learning Connections rooms are, when they're done, they're done. But in terms of video production, that Perkins money, actually the grant really covers this. And actually there's a large provision for video production in there. So we've been itching to use, to be able to use it in that direction. So we're feeling pretty confident that won't be a problem.
So Jake, we would just need to be careful that there isn't the reoccurring cost for sure, as Rachel just
Correct.
brought up, because again, it's student activity money,
Yep.
and to ensure that there isn't any concern with using, again, because it's intended to not to supplement. So, or yes,
Yep.
not it's intended to supplement, not supplant, and so we have to ensure that that doesn't get muddy at all, which
Sure.
can be confusing with something like this because it's an activity for kids, not for adults, not necessarily curriculum connected, but yet it can get a little bit muddy. So we just all along the way with Dawn checking in with the auditors, being sure that one thing doesn't, exciting, yes, but just to be sure that one thing doesn't cross the line in any way, just to circle back.
Sure.
Right.
So what are the expected annual expenses going forward?
Yeah, to be perfectly honest, we think it's going to be pretty minimal because once, obviously, the technology at some point will be obsolete, but at this point, Wes is feeling pretty good that that he can maintain it himself and keep moving it forward. We're not really seeing a lot of annual. We're not putting any teacher stipends toward it currently. There's no course on the inside that's running, off of it. It really should truly be for the kids. And we have kids who are super excited about this type of project. I don't think garnering the student support is going to be challenging for us either. So we're not envisioning it. I can ask Wes and see if he has an idea of something more concrete. But I did ask him that, and he felt pretty comfortable with it. But let me ask him that question more pointed.
Yeah, Jake, if I can jump in, one of the expenses that we talked about is really the heating and cooling of the space, which is accounted for in the quote there as the setup. And then, as with any space, if you're going to be heating and cooling it on a regular basis, then there's going to be that expense. But we wouldn't expect that to be anything, significant.
That's a good point.
And so to touch on sort of Dr. De Silva's point, is this a facility that at some point could be used for instruction? Could there conceivably be a video production class as part of the curriculum?
Wow, that would be lovely, but at this point, yeah, it's not. We just physically couldn't do it because we don't have the space and we don't have the equipment. So having enough support to think that we could, get 15 kids into a room who are interested in it would be fantastic. That'd be a great problem to fall into.
Okay.
Yeah, so that was actually I was going to circle back with that because I do know that there is excitement about the possibility of bringing that back. I think there was a video production course a number of years ago.
We used to have it years and years ago. Yeah.
Yes, I fell upon the space recently, literally, maybe fell in it, scratched my leg, but the space needed to be cleared out anyway.
Right.
We had a lot of old equipment. I think over 1,500 old technology pieces that were being removed. Wes is actually just looking for Selectmen's approval to have it removed. But it needed to be cleared out, and so that we can access that space in ways that kids can now contribute on the activity side, I think is great. And yes, the alternative might be that somewhere in the future, or the add-on or the problem that we fall into is that in the future we use that space during the day for curriculum as well. But it shouldn't take away for kids' opportunities to be engaged with the purpose that Jake outlined here. So that's the one piece that we'll just have to be sure we navigate, Jake.
So is that space you're talking about? Is that the space at Tiger Hollow? Or
So there's a separate space in the building. It's in down in the tech ed wing. There's an old, I don't know if anyone remembers Tiger TV. That was a thing here a number of years ago. And again, a teacher retires and somebody moves along, and it fell into disarray. And so there is a tiny, very tiny video room that exists here that would not by any stretch be what you would need today to do video production. So
right.
It is a separate space in the building, but it does exist.
So there's a possibility of using that.
A classroom space exists. Yes.
So would that make, so why, if we have that space already, why are we creating new space at Tiger Hollow versus retrofitting that space? Yeah,
2 reasons. The biggest would be that so many of our events are happening at Tiger Hollow and in that space. And so the ability to do live feeds, the kids, the way that I've seen it run other schools, are kids are running down and they're interviewing, coaches and kids and people live. And so much of our what we do happens down there. The class would be part of the day. So the way that it's run in some other places I've seen is all the videoing is happening at offsite around the building. The classroom is being used during the day for the editing, producing, whatever that is. So they really can be 2 totally separate spaces. And one, being closer to Tiger Hollow, frankly, is just going to work a lot better for us in terms versus trying to retrofit something in the building. This space, if you saw it, it's so tiny, you really wouldn't be able to have a class there if you wanted to now. Either way, you'd be talking about a lot of work in terms of construction.
Sure. Okay. So where I'm going is that, so it is focused on Tiger Hollow versus musicals, plays, music concerts.
I think we just have more of those events, to be perfectly honest. I mean, I think I would love to be able to stream sub-varsity events so that, parents and grandparents all around the country can watch their kids, and it would be much harder to be stationed out of. But every single of the other events that we host also, again, I've seen other schools, they're all done because everything was mobile, and Wes made sure that all the pieces he wants to buy are all mobile.
Okay. Are there any other questions? Okay.
Okay, let me see if I can bring athletics to life here really quickly.
Yeah.
The athletic fund, let me just go over where I believe we left off in our November meeting. We agreed that the athletic expense would become part of the general fund and no longer be an individual fund in itself. We said that the revenue collected for pay to participate and gate receipts will be maintained in the student activity account and offset by specific expenses related to the sport. We said rental revenue would no longer be collected, and any rental would become part of the building rental process. And I believe we discussed that any remaining funds in the checking account left over at the end of this fiscal year that is unused by athletics would be transferred into the town's sinking fund and used for Tiger Hollow, which I believe the sinking fund is specifically for the Tiger Hollow facility. Did I capture that correctly? I believe so.
Any comments? Are there any questions?
So just to show you on that process that we have not set up the accounts. The accounts are all set up in 510, and we, in anticipation of coming into the next budget year, we did remove rental revenue from the athletic budget itself, knowing that that would become part of the building rental for next year. So what the budget being brought before you is less that rental revenue. And therefore, when we get into the budget season, we'll be looking to fund the needs of the athletic department so that going forward, as it becomes part of general fund, we don't have a shortfall when our next budget process occurs.
Okay. Okay. Are there any questions? Okay. Just real quick for our last words. I actually had a question, and I might be conflating. back to what we were talking about, building out our AV capabilities. I know we were entered into a contract with a company, and forgive me because I'm going to blow all the details, to film and stream and dissect all of our athletic events. Sort of is there any overlap to this? How does that overlap? What is just?
Yeah, so the company that you're referring to, Ken, is called Agile Sports Technology. It's commonly known as Huddle. And Huddle has been, I would say, key to keeping our athletic families happy this year in particular, because with limitations on who can attend games and all sorts of things, it's given people all over the country, quite literally, the ability to watch kids play and watch grandkids play and things of that nature. So Huddle has been fantastic for us. To answer your question, they would work in conjunction. So Huddle has two permanently installed, at the moment, we have two permanently installed cameras, one at Tiger Hollow and one in our gym. And once we get our system up and running, we can take a look at whether or not it replaces, or whether or not we would need to continue with the full capacity of our Huddle agreement. In the short term, they wouldn't quite be geared at the same thing. So in the short term, I wouldn't swap one out for the other until we have it up and running and we know that we're going to be able to get the same capability. But when we go back a year or two, and we first went down the road of having Huddle come in and entering into that agreement, it was with the expectation to be able to provide certain services. It's been able to do that for us over the last couple of years. As we move forward, we continue to look at that and see, do we need them or do we not? I can tell you without a doubt, there would be certain pieces of that we would continue with, because there's a functionality piece for coaches and for kids. It gives them a virtual platform to look at film after the fact and those sorts of things. So certainly we would continue with at least certain aspects of that, but that could be, much less than the contracted amount that we have budgeted right now. So yeah, it's a matter of, once we get up and running, we'll be able to take another look at that and see if it needs to be continued.
That's good. Actually, my question was about synergy. So you did touch on it. More than the supplanting it is how can they work together? Are there things that are in place for that we could use as part of this program? Should we move forward?
Yeah, and I definitely think that there are. And the other piece that's worth mentioning is we have some fantastic pieces of technology in our two big scoreboards right now that some of our kids have already gone on their own time and created video. I mean, we talk about video production. There's an appetite for it. We have kids who create hype videos and things like that. If you've been to a contest, maybe you've seen us play one of those. But this would expand that ability. We can do live replays and all sorts of things that we might be able to get into in terms of the athletic side. But I don't want it to be solely focused on athletics, because it wouldn't be. This gives us the capability to really service all students. And Sean mentioned concerts and things of that nature. We believe that we'd be able to really handle a wide variety of student activities through that space. So that was the goal when we came up with the concept.
Good. Yeah, I'd like to see a hype video for a music concert. I like those.
See what we could do.
I like those. All right, are there any other questions? All right, I thank you all for your time this morning, and I know we're running a little late, but can I have a motion to adjourn? Second, Sean. All right, Rachel with the motion, Sean with the second. All right, I move to adjourn. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.